It's not easy to talk about St. Francis. On the one side, we have a man of simplicity, just, a young man that decided to live a life of poverty, in simplicity, in humility. On the other side, his spirituality is so rich, so deep, that it's not easy to understand it in a correct way. That's why we say in Italy, everyone has his own St. Francis, because he is the saint so much talked about. Believers talk about St. Francis, of course. Non-believers talk about St. Francis. Muslims talk about St. Francis. Atheists talk about St. Francis. He's so famous, and you can read so much about him. Sometimes there are also misunderstandings about his figure, his history. Anyway, the life and message and spirituality of St. Francis has been built upon three fundamental encounters. Life is all made, it's all a thing about encounters. If you think about that, maybe if you think about your personal life, if I think about my personal life, if one night in the spring of 25 years ago, I wouldn't have borrowed a biography of Saint Maximilian Kolbe in the small library of my parish, and if I wouldn't have read the life of Saint Maximilian Kolbe, I wouldn't become a friar and then a priest, just with that small choice that seemed so irrelevant 25 years ago. In any case, encounters define our life. And the first encounter that defined and structured the life of St. Francis were the one with Jesus and Mary. We see how this is very true for all Franciscan spirituality. The personal encounter of St. Francis with Jesus on the Holy Cross completely upturned his life. And that is what Christianity is all about. Christianity is not about an encounter, or is not about a law. We talked in the meeting before about canon law, how to give a structure to the MIM, because the law of the Church is made up of, if you think about that, 1,700 canons that has been written in the canon law. Is this the essence of Christianity? Of course not. The Church has its own law, but that's not what Christianity is all about. Christianity has commandments, even more important than the canon law. 10 commandments. We need to live them, to be faithful to them. Is that what Christianity is all about? No, even the commandments, they are not the essence of Christianity. The essence of Christianity, the example of St. Francis and the teaching of the Church tells us it's a personal encounter with Jesus that goes day by day, and it has to be strengthened with the conversion of everyday life. It's a duty that we must repeat every day of our life. Because we receive by the Church the faith, the objective faith, the doctrine of the Church, the catechism. This is given to us by our catechists, by our parish priests, by our parents. But then we have to turn that doctrine in our personal faith, not because we have to think in a different way from the Church or from the doctrine, but that faith must become really yours, like St. Francis. He knew Christ, and he wanted to know what path Jesus had prepared for him, his personal vocation. It's not enough to know that God and Jesus and Christianity is the truth. You have to, build upon the truth your personal path, your personal vocation. so to speak, in order to know and put into practice God's will every day. That is the example that St. Francis gives us, to try to know every day the will of God and to put into practice. And which is the best way to put into practice God's will? It's the way of the cross. This is a fundamental aspect of Christianity that shines even more in Franciscan spirituality. You cannot accomplish anything good in life unless you make a sacrifice. People who has a family know even better this. There is nothing of values in life that has to be accomplished without sacrifice. No way. This is the way of our Lord and our Blessed Mother. This is the way of Christianity. You cannot put into practice God's will after you have known Him unless you sacrifice yourself. Of course, in our life, and the example of St. Francis also gives us this aspect, is full of consolations, of good things. God gives us 1 cross and 10 consolations, even though we don't recognize it. Sometimes we reflect only upon the sufferings, the problems, the storms that we experience, and we do not know, we do not realize how much consolation, how much help, how much pardons are given us by God. So knowing God and replicating our life the way of the cross of Jesus and the example of our sorrowful mother is the way to know Him even better. Because the truth of Christianity is very peculiar. You have to be good, to become good in order to understand better Christianity. I'll give you an example. I can be, the worst person in the world. And after I read a book about maths, I can become the most important scientist in the world. Because being a scientist is not a matter of being good or bad. It's just a matter of knowledge, natural knowledge. In the case of the Gospel, it's very different. You can read it 10,000 times. You can read spiritual books 10,000 times. But unless you become good, you become a saint, you try to sanctify yourself, you will never understand deeply the Gospel. This is the difference between earthly wisdom and heavenly wisdom. This is the difficult aspect of Christianity. It's not a matter of knowledge. You have to know, of course. You cannot put into practice what you don't know. But knowing is not enough. And Franciscan spirituality has been built exactly on this truth. Franciscans, theologians, Franciscan master of spirituality always stress this aspect. Put into practice, orthopraxis, not only orthodoxy, but orthopraxis, doing the good things, put into practice God's will. The second encounter of St. Francis in importance was the encounter with the poor, with people that are sick. And this is another fundamental aspect of Christianity. Because Incarnation tells us that we know God that we don't see at all through the faces of Jesus, the incarnate Word. But since we don't see now the face of the incarnate Word, we must see the face of God through the faces of our brothers and sisters, especially people that are in need. Of course, there are many kinds of needs. The most important of all are the spiritual ones. We never forget that. Because in the end, the true poverty of man is the one that is caused by sin. This is the most dangerous kind of poverty. Because human poverty At the end, you can fight it, you can, at the end, it does not define your eternal destiny. You can be a poor and go to paradise, you can be rich and go to paradise, you can be poor and go to hell, you can be poor and go, But sin does not pardon. Sin can really destroy your life unless you don't entrust yourself to God, you don't rely upon divine mercy. It's a kind of pandemic that only God can overcome. You can find, every kind of vaccine, but still human diseases will be always with us, just like poverty. In the case of sin, you must rely only on God. In any case, the charity that we have to live as Christians, the witnesses of the love of God we have to incarnate in our life, passes through the encounter with the people that are in need, with the people that are suffering. This is like the cross, a way that we cannot avoid. We cannot be Christian unless we love others, because it's the ultimate proof that you love the Father, that you love the Son, that you love the Holy Spirit, that you love the Blessed Virgin Mary. You cannot love that you don't see unless you love people that you can touch in their sufferings, in their needs. So this is a second encounter that helped St. Francis know even better his vocation. The third encounter was a very special one. Maybe you can think this is a strange kind of encounter. The encounter with himself. You can think, what is an encounter with myself? You're just like talking crazy. We can translate this encounter with ourselves in the demand that St. Francis asked, who am I, who are you? In the value and virtue of being sincere, or being, you've been true to yourself. Because this is a very fundamental quality of human being. You can be, the worst sinners in the world. You can do a lot of mistakes in your spiritual life. But as long as you keep true to yourself, as long as you remain sincere to yourself and to God, as long as you know yourself, you are always on the path of salvation. On the other side, you can be at a very high level of spirituality. You can have walked a long way towards God and toward your eternal destiny. But as long as you start to lose being true to yourself and to God, things for you can only get worse. Because being true to you and to God is the fundamental quality to encounter divine mercy, without which we are hopeless. So, the humbleness of St. Francis, one time we can remember in the biographies of his life, he was in the region of the Marche in central Italy, not far from where Loreto, the shrine of Loreto is. He was walking with a companion, with another Friars, that suddenly said to him, "You are so saint, you are so, forward in the way of God, in the path to heaven." And St. Francis stopped and said, if the grace of God, if the grace that God gave me was to be given to the most sinner person in the world, he would be even more saint than me. He would have become far more saint than me. That is the meaning of being true to yourself, to recognize that you are nothing and God is everything. My everything and my whole, as St. Francis said. This sincerity is another name for being humble, to recognize that without God we are nothing. We are everything, but there is the love of God that sustains us And this is the fundamental truth of Christianity. This is a fundamental truth of the creed that we are to, to pray in few minutes. Creator of all things, sources of all graces. These are the fundamental encounters that gave light and strength to St. Francis to be able to become what he became, so great a saint. All of these hands in hands with a hidden presence in his life, because his biography do not speak much about Marian devotion in St. Francis. They quote it not very often. We know that he was a great lover of our Blessed Mother, but he don't have many words about Marian devotion in St. Francis. But this is what, a fundamental aspect of Franciscan spirituality, that Christology, the knowledge and love of God, and Mariology, the knowledge of love of our Blessed Mother, go hands in hands in Franciscan spirituality. Every time, because St. Francis loved the Virgin Mary because of Christ. He did not put Mary and Jesus aside, one here and one there, but one in another. And that is the fundamental aspect, as you already know, of the spirituality of the Franciscan and sister of the Immaculate. That we see Mary in Jesus and Jesus in Mary. Because Mary is like a bridge that gave us Jesus, and Jesus entrusted us on the cross to the Blessed Virgin Mary. It's like a prequel, if you reflect upon that, of the consecration to the Immaculate, which is by which we can respond to the spiritual maternity that Jesus gave us on the cross, and we reply back with this consecration. And if you think about that, every time we glorify Mary in the Immaculate Conception, on the Assumption into heaven, on the being the mediatrix of all graces, in his perpetual virginity, what we are talking about? We are talking about a kind of glorification of Jesus Christ. She is perpetual virgin because she gave birth to Christ. The reason of that privilege is Christ. We contemplate in the Immaculate Conception the perfect way of redemption that Jesus chose for her, because Mary was object of redemption, but in a different way from us. We have been redeemed after committing sin. She has been redeemed before she could even think about the sin, in the day of his conception. And this is the perfect redemption. So we don't have to fear to see Mary and Jesus like two objects that are one at the side of the other, but one in another. Of course, Mary in Jesus above all, because she has been built, formed by the grace of God, won by the sacrifice of Christ. This is our three. But there are even more, but I cannot talk much. I already said probably too much. But these three encounters and the presence, hidden but deep and real, of Mary in the life of St. Francis help us a little bit to understand the path of his life and the miracle of his sanctity and the, endless fruits that Franciscan spirituality gave to the Church, to the point to arrive at our times that much of the teaching of the Pope Francis, not with a reason chose to have to bear his name as a Pope, is founded upon Franciscan values and Franciscan spirituality. Of course, he is a Jesuit, so he brings with him also the spirituality of his religious family. There are so many Franciscan things in the teaching of our actual Pope that the Franciscan can understand very easily. And this is a gift for the Church, for us. And it's a way of strengthening our purpose, our commitment to live this spirituality in the consecration to the Immaculate, in the prayer, in the sacrifice, and charity to the end. Because at the end, this is the main, purpose of our life. We have to start in a good way. We have to walk in a good way. But the essence of Christianity is to arrive at the end in the full faith in God. Praise be to Jesus and Mary.